Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes. Today we will be diving into a discussion on the fact that Congress is ready to certify Donald Trump's election win, which coincides with the 4-year anniversary of the January the 6th Capitol riots. US lawmakers will gather on Monday for a joint session of Congress to certify Donald Trump's presidential election win, a procedure that happens every 4 years after the vote and 2 weeks before the president's inauguration. Last time round, the routine went away on the same day. January the 6th marks the anniversary of one of the darkest days in American history. It was 4 years ago today that a violent mob invaded the US Capitol building in a deadly effort to nullify the results of the 2020 presidential election. This year's certification will bring Trump a step closer to returning to the White House after the Republican won the 2024 contest against Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris. Because of her role as leader of the Senate, Harris will oversee the certification. This will not be the first time that a defeated election candidate has had to oversee the certification process. While there is some lingering anxiety in Washington, D.C., this year's certification is expected to go off without a hitch, as Harris has not disputed the results. Today we are joined by 3 guests. We have Rick Mehta, who is a Republican leader, live from the USA. We have former Ambassador Dr. Deepak Vohra, former diplomat, Irina Tsukerman, editor-in-chief in the Washington Outsider. Thank you very much for joining us. I would like to start with you, Rick Mehta. We're looking at arguably the greatest political comeback of all time, and when we take our minds back to 4 years ago, it's hard to believe from a certain point of view that we're in this position. What do you think changed for the people of America over that 4-year period that made Trump a runaway victor?
Well, look, today is a great day to certify the results of President Donald Trump. And there was a lot of questions that were called into 2020, answers of which we still don't have to this day about how the election was conducted. At a time where there was a pandemic and rules kept being shifted, our constitutional rights being implicated. And so when you look at what happened and transpired over the last 4 years, I think it didn't sit well, at least in half of America, where 81 million people voted for President Trump in terms of what those results were. And then you had 4 years of a failed economy under President Biden and Vice President Harris, where the people of America continue to struggle with high inflation, high interest rates, unaffordability of housing, decline in employment rates, and complete collapse of economic conditions that I think sat really negatively among the American people. And so for the people of America, when we went to go vote, we voted exactly about what would impact our families. And so what's changed is people's perception, people's want of freedom away from a out-of-touch administration that didn't truly understand what the average American was going through.
Former Ambassador Vohra, looking at the process and looking at this being Trump's sort of final step before his inauguration, where do you think he sits in terms of his power, not just across America, but also worldwide, considering he's come back from defeat, but also come back with the popular vote, he's come back with a landslide victory. How do you think he can view this transition, and how do you think that will be taken into his administration?
Well, thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be on your amazing channel, on your discussion. I see Ms. Zuckerman is here, and I'm going to learn a lot from her, and Mr. Mehta has already made it very clear. When you have 2 economic and intellectual powerhouses like them, I should retire gracefully. Donald Trump did not want to retire gracefully. Let me put it to you like this, looking at it from an Indian perspective. By the way, the disclaimer is that I've met this person, and affectionately we refer to him as MacDonald Trump. Because he's a businessman. But we find him, whenever I've met him, interacted with him, found him to be extremely perceptive, very knowledgeable, very clear about what he wants. And when he talks about America first, I believe he means what he says. Now, sir, I lived in the United States in the early 80s. I was there when the attack took place on former President Ronald Reagan, etc. And what I could afford to buy then for $10, today probably it's 70 or 80 or whatever. Inflation has been hitting America, and America doesn't like inflation. Second is joblessness. President Joe Biden, we all know this man, with due respect to all our American friends, he's really lost it. And the man is not all there. We saw what happened at the G20 in Brazil when he didn't show up for the family photograph and had to be escorted and he was somewhere behind a tree, etc. That's not the kind of thing that we look for in America. About Donald Trump, like him, hate him, you can't ignore him. And he has appealed, he has touched the chords of Sri Mehta's heart and others like him by saying that I want to restore to America its primacy in the world. America doesn't like being number two to anybody. And they are clobbering Russia because Russia dared to challenge American supremacy. They're going to clobber China next. China says, oh, we're at the same level as you are. Fortunately, India is not there yet. We are friends with them. We say, yeah, you be the king, we'll follow you very quickly behind, we'll be the prince. So I believe that President Trump will, from day one, he's already started letting us know what he plans to do. He's going to be sworn in. There will not be a hitch. I've seen comebacks, sir. In my own country, Mrs. Indira Gandhi's comeback. She was booted out because of the emergency, etc., many other issues. Then the successor government was an unmitigated disaster, and she came right back with a thumping majority. I believe that is what has happened to Mr. Trump. The Americans have had it. Forgive me, Mr. Mehta, you're an American citizen, so are you, Mr. Zuckerman. Forgive me, Americans, and I have two kids who live in New York, which is a sanctuary state and a democratic state. They've had it with Mr. Biden and Ms. Kamala Harris. That's the change that everybody wants.
Irina Zuckerman, joining us live from New York. We can't forget, of course, what happened 4 years ago, and it's almost ironic that this peaceful power shift will happen today, 4 years on from a dark day in American history, as we've mentioned already. Do you think that's still playing a part in the psyche and the thoughts of American people, or do you think the struggles over the past 4 years have almost made people forget what happened? And do you think that will be a continuing theme throughout Trump's administration?
Well, thank you so much for this question. Actually, I don't think January 6th is forgotten. I think it will have long-term implications. However, it did not overshadow some of the challenges of the past 4 years. And looking at the election results, they speak for themselves. Kamala Harris lost millions of votes compared to the reported votes by Joe Biden in 2020. And that's assuming that all the votes were actually relatively accurate and considering taking the positions of the Democrats and the many Republicans on the matter who believe Trump lost the election. Harris cost Democratic voters their position, and she lost the Electoral College, which again speaks for itself. Her campaign had been disastrous, and overall, the past 4 years had been disastrous, at least in comparison to how many of the people remember Trump's first term. That's not to say there is no room for criticism of Trump's policies. There's plenty, but with the two players at the end of the day, the voters had to choose who they thought would make their lives better. And the one question that stood out for me during the debates was what Trump actually said, and he said, "Who do you think, under whose governance do you think you were better off after 4 years?" That's not to say that everything in the economy was always terrible. In fact, Trump is encouraging a growing and positive economy with low unemployment. But overspending, complete mismanagement by the Biden administration, over-regulation of certain sectors, and policies that seem to be detrimental to the economic outlook and to the improvement in the lives of average Americans, those things had very severe costs, and they cost millions of Americans who were neutral or Democrats or critics of Donald Trump and didn't like him at all to switch parties at the end of the day, to vote, to split the tickets, and to vote for a Republican nominee to the White House, even as some of them voted for Democrats to lower level offices. And that again is a testimony to how many mistakes the Biden administration and the Kamala Harris campaign had made. They failed to speak to average Americans. They failed to address both negative perceptions of their work and the reality, and they felt to connect in many ways, even if they thought they meant well. That is not how it came across. At the end of the day, we can count the domestic disasters with trillions of dollars spent on green initiatives, the outcomes of which are less than uncertain and which contributed to the inflation mentioned by the other two panelists. We can talk about the foreign policy disasters that made U.S. appear weak, even if its military continues to be one of the strongest in the world, and the passive response to internal and external threats, even if U.S. is perfectly capable of retaining its position. That's what cost the Biden and the Harris campaigns the election. It's not that U.S. stopped being quote unquote first. It hasn't stopped having the natural resources or the human resources that it has, or its economy didn't collapse. But the response of the administration underutilized these resources. It made U.S. act weak. It was the poor leadership rather than the failure of the Constitution or the U.S. that ultimately undermined this campaign.
Rick Mehta, I want to pose to you a question relating again to the riots, but looking at Trump's actions that he's promised once he comes into power in 2 weeks' time. Up to 300 rioters said to be pardoned by Trump. It's a promise that he's made. Do you think that sends the right message to American people, that if you support me, I'm going to pardon you irrelevant of your actions? And what response do you have in terms of that? I know you've said already that there were questions raised over the election, but surely whatever questions were raised, the actions following weren't justified.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's look at the standard that's been set on pardons, right? When you look at President Biden pardoning his son after saying that he wasn't going to pardon him for crimes that are unfathomable, drug use, gun possession, illegal gun possession, and putting that aside, I think President Biden has set the record for the highest number of pardons of convicted killers, terrorists, and others. That's a sad day for America. Now, let's look at that contrast to those that were at the Capitol building to protest their constitutional rights to gather together. When you're looking at 300 people, let's not neglect the fact that there was hundreds of thousands of people gathered that day that had questions about the election results. I myself, who was the U.S. nominee for the state of New Jersey, literally saw fraud happening in my own state when you have ballots across that were made to be mail-in. And when people feel that their voice is suppressed because they're being disenfranchised, we have a history of disenfranchising people from participating in the electoral process. And that's what people were very upset and angry about. Again, answers that we still don't have. Does that justify the actions of those 300? No. But when you look at what happened that day, how many people died because of the results of that actual riot and breaking into the Capitol building, those folks should have a second chance at being able to have a second chance to know that what was done from right, what was done from wrong. But at the end of the day, you really cannot ignore the fact that the way that our elections were conducted in 2020 were unprecedented, and there was a lot of highly, highly irregular activities that I can personally speak from.
Former Ambassador Vora, coming back to the Democrats and looking specifically at Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they both have commented today, but they keep bringing it back to the riots 4 years ago. Do you think that shift in terms of them handing over power peacefully, but also trying to remind the American people of what happened, do you think that's intentional and they're doing that potentially looking at future actions from the Trump administration and sort of setting their stone on the reality of what happened and trying really to bring that back into focus and potentially draw a mark over what Donald Trump is doing today, which is in turn taking power?
You use the term transfer of power peacefully, but I don't think it's transfer of power gracefully. America still remains the gold standard for the rest of the world. So open your doors to people without a visa coming into the United States and I don't know, 70 billion people will probably rush across, or whatever the figure is, 7 billion or 8 billion or 9 billion will rush and be in the United States. It still is the ultimate magnet. What they should have done really, and what I believe that we did in India when change of government took place, was that you acknowledge that, all right, the other guy has won, I did my best, it was a good fight. There was a time when Atal Bihari Vajpayee, one of our former prime ministers, he lost the election. He was very popular. So I was then anchoring a television show early morning. He came to the studios. We were all asked to wait. He came and he said, I have lost. India has won. I've never heard a more powerful statement and a more self-deprecating. The humility of the man. Now, that kind of thing we would have hoped would come. I think President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris should very gracefully accept the fact that the people of America don't want them anymore, just as the people to your north don't want that character anymore, and he's going to resign in a few hours, I hope. So when this happened, when the people speak, their voice should be respected. And going back and saying, this is what even though Trump kept saying that the election was stolen from me, but he was a loser at that time. He was no longer the president. These people are in power. For them to say this kind of thing, bring up issues that are negative, but which the American people want to forget, I don't think that's a very wise step to take. Our eyes, sir, are given to us in the front of our head, not at the back. We don't look backwards, we look ahead. And I believe America will look forward with confidence to a new future with President Donald Trump. One thing you can't doubt about him is his total commitment to America.
Irina Tsukerman, looking at the next 4 years that we've got, how do you think that might play out? We now know Trump is moving forward and will be inaugurated on the 20th, as we've known for some weeks now. But do you think that this is a new age for America? Do you think some of his claims and promises during his election will be followed up? And how do you think those relationships with border countries and elsewhere might be played out in terms of the relationships and also tariffs that have been mentioned too?
I'll be very unequivocal in my response. When the voters are forced to choose the lesser of two evils rather than the bigger of two goods, the ultimate outcome is, by definition, is going to be troubling, questionable, and potentially unclear. And this is what we are facing right now. Donald Trump's team is a different team from what we saw 4 years ago. Their rhetoric is different. Their backgrounds are different. In many ways, many of the members of the new team are more loyal, but less to Donald Trump personally, but less professional, less experienced, and less committed to U.S. constitutional values, certainly less committed to Republican Party values. Many of them are not even Republicans, and many of them have drawn wide controversy, even from supporters of Trump himself. What happened 4 years ago was a disaster. The events of January 6th were absolutely disgraceful, and the people who were convicted were thugs and terrorists. I'm not going to mince my words. Unfortunately, Biden's lawlessness in pardoning his son opened the doors for Trump to have an excuse to do the same, and we are hearing that he is going to give clemency to the January 6th rioters and participants. And some in his circles are celebrating, but I think it's a sad day for democracy. And I think while more bread and butter issues, economic issues, social issues weighed on the minds of the voters when they voted this past election, and I think this particular handling of these events did not go unnoticed. And I think there is a lot of concerns about what Donald Trump will do in the next 4 years. Still, I still believe in strong checks and balances that will prevent some sort of subversion of democracy. And quite frankly, we are more likely to see chaos than tyranny under this administration. That's not to say that there is absolutely nothing positive to expect. I do believe that Trump and his team are more likely to believe in the value of deterrence. I think they're more likely to lift burdensome regulations that stifled American innovation and ingenuity. I think those are positive things to look forward to, and I think Trump is well known for quickly replacing the members of his team who failed to do their job, which is a hopeful sign in light of the many members of his team who came in for the value of the PR and not necessarily for the value of the experience that they're bringing to the fore. there's a
Yes,
concern about
sorry
the
to
one.
interrupt. Sorry to interrupt there. I want to go to Rick Mater for this as a Republican. Those appointments that Irina just mentioned, there are some big appointments there. Some people with limited experience in politics in general, but leading a country as well. What do you think those appointments by Trump signal in terms of what we're going to see moving forward? And do you think now he's got a second chance at being the president, at being the most powerful person, arguably in the world? What do you think we'll see differently from last time?
So what I'll say is that this is a president and an administration that's untethered. This is his last term, and so he doesn't have to campaign. And so the one thing that the American public has been looking for, that they've been missing so badly from the Biden and Harris administration, is authenticity. And now, if you look at those appointments, you're looking at folks who were Democrat turned Republican support, primarily because they felt that the Democratic Party left them. You look at, for example, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who was a staunch supporter of the Democrat Party, arguably from his great uncle. And then you look at Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, you look at President Trump's vice president-elect J.D. Vance, who was a former critic of President Trump, and now he's his sitting vice president. So what President Trump has effectively been able to do is to look at the policies, look at the issues, and get people to rally behind him, regardless of the party and the party establishment politics. So this is a very exciting day for the American public who want the government to be run by the people. And so I think you're going to see a marked change in the way government operates. There's already a new Department of Government Efficiency being formed by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. Time set to have a date to effectuate a government change by 2026, marking a historic day for our government to pare back not just the regulations, but the fourth branch of government, the administrative state that now is run by unelected officials, and put the power back to elected officials, those that represent the people, those that have to answer through the electoral process, through the political process. And that's very, very important. The second looming thing that's been going on is a high debt ceiling that America has not been able to dig out of. Trillions of dollars in debt, blank checks being written to Ukraine. And so as the Honorable Ambassador was saying, Donald Trump is 100% America first. And what America first means, putting our economy first and putting the people, where we continue to struggle with high homelessness rates, high unemployment, and yet we have no problems pulling out a checkbook and writing $1 billion to Zelensky. So, again, that doesn't mean we ignore global affairs. America will be very much involved in influencing the global stage, but they will not do it at the detriment of the American people, which has been so easily done by the Democrat Party. So I think we're going to see a major shift. And honestly, I'm personally excited. I have 3 boys at home. And so the economic condition improvements are going to be great just for me and my personal bank account, as they will be for all Americans. And so this is going to be a great, great day. January 20th can't come soon enough.
Former Ambassador Vora, I want to pick up on something there relating to geopolitics and the impact of the wars across the world on American finances, but also looking at Trump's words and him saying that in his first day of office, he looks to end all of the wars that are ongoing, Russia, Ukraine, the Middle East crisis. How can he do that? And if they are just words, what does that say? And how does that set a precedent for the rest of his term? If he's saying he's going to end these wars and they're not ended, can the people believe his words?
I would tend to believe what he says. When he was president the last time, his first visit, if I recall, overseas, one of the first was to Saudi Arabia. And then the whole process started of normalizing the situation in the Middle East, which has got messed up again for various reasons. What really has not happened, sir, which I'd like to see happen, is proper leadership from Washington, because Washington's leadership is accepted universally, less now than it used to be. But President Joe Biden, the leader, had unfortunately become Joe Biden the liability for the United States. And Mr. Trump will have to deal with this, which he will. He's quite capable of doing it. Geopolitically, he's one person who can solve the conflict at the moment between Russia and Ukraine. He said so. what was, I don't know, Mr. Mehta and Ms. Ackerman would be able to tell me. I don't even know how many Americans care about what's happening in Ukraine. They've probably not heard of it before the war started. America's goal is not, or at least the present administration, is not to save Zelensky. It's to weaken Russia. They haven't succeeded. And when that becomes your goal is negative, then I don't think anything is happening. And that clown in Kiev, he goes around pretending to be the world's greatest statesman, the world's greatest. It's laughable. I mean, I've served there, sir, so I know these people. Therefore, my own feeling is that geopolitically it'll be welcomed. The African states will welcome it because they're suffering for no fault of theirs. Food, fuel, fertilizer. They don't even know where Ukraine is. They don't know what's happening in Gaza. They don't care about the Houthis or Hamas or Hezbollah. Mr. Trump should be in a position to settle these issues on terms that are acceptable to everybody. He's a deal maker, sir. And today the world wants him to make a deal that the world is a safer, calmer place.
Irina Tsukaman, we have time for one more. Trump in power, just one quick answer from you. What does that mean for each and every American person?
I think many people have come to realize that Trump is well known for hyperbole, for exaggerations, and for quickly changing his mind. I think he will turn out to be much more pragmatic than people realize, and I think they have to be prepared that many of the electoral rhetorical turns of phrase are not going to materialize. Geopolitical issues are the primary front where I see Trump's electoral rhetoric being challenged by pragmatic reality. Russia, for instance, resisting any sort of peace negotiation, rejecting his overtures, is something that Trump is not going to take lying down. He is not one who likes to be challenged and publicly humiliated. I think his hand will be forced to provide additional support to Ukraine, and that will ultimately strengthen the US that is committed to building up and standing up for its allies, is a strong US, and that will ultimately, while not lining up to Trump's rhetoric, will line up to the vision of America, of making America great, keeping America great. And I think the same goes with the Middle East. Trump may wish for deals with Iran, with other countries, for quick settlement of conflicts, but when push comes to shove, he will stand up and build up his allies, because he will not take challenges from terrorist organizations and terrorist supporting states. I don't think this geopolitical transition is going to be perfect. I think there's going to be a lot of challenges and unevenness, and I think Americans are ready for that because they've been through Trump's first term already. I think he will possibly lay a path for better choices by both parties in terms of the candidates in the future, and I think at the end of the day it's going to be fine. I think there's going to be bumps. I think it's going to be a lot of broken expectations on many levels, and I think many people will disagree with Trump does, but I think US is strong enough to continue moving forward, and I think there'll be a lot of opportunities for people who are invested not in fighting Donald Trump or pearl clutching over issues that they disagree with, but in strengthening the US and helping the US government to do the best it can, and hopefully voting the way they want to in the future.
Irina Tsukaman, thank you for joining us. Also, thank you to former Ambassador Dr. Deepak Vohra and also Rick Mehta. We will, of course, be following the US politics and election leading up to his inauguration on January the 20th. Until then, with more debates, we'll be back on NewsX.